Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon for those of you in Southeast Asia and good morning for those of you in Europe. I'm Rini Setiawati, and today I will be your host for this webinar. And welcome to this webinar using CDP's framework to report deforestation and conversion-free production and sourcing. Today, we will discuss one of the most frequently asked topics by companies, which is deforestation and conversion-free production and sourcing. Next, please. Before we start, let's go through some housekeeping. First, if you have any question, please use the Q&A button. You can write your question throughout the webinar. The panelists will answer it on the Q&A box or live if time is permitted. And this webinar will be recorded. Slides and recording of this webinar will be shared with all registered participants. And simultaneous Bahasa Indonesia interpretation is also available for our webinar today. Next, please. Now, let's check the brief overview of our agenda for today. The webinar will be an hour event and will consist of several sessions. It will be kicked off with a presentation from the Accountability Framework Initiative, which will discuss about how to use the accountability framework as a guide to achieve deforestation and conversion-free supply chains, including the concept, definition, and requirement. This session will then be followed by an overview on how to use CDP forests to report deforestation and conversion-free status aligned with the accountability framework, including the best practices in reporting deforestation and conversion-free volume. This session will be followed by a Q&A, where we're going to share some of the most frequently asked questions by companies regarding this topic, and also questions submitted by participants throughout the webinar. And last but not least, we will close the event in 1 hour time. And just a reminder for the speakers, I will give a time notification 2 minutes prior the end of your session. And before we move on, I just want to give a little bit of background on why CDP and AFi deliver this event. So from 2023, CDP is asking companies to disclose the deforestation and conversion-free status of their commodities in question F1.5A and F1.5B. Reporting is in line with the principle and guidance of the accountability framework and consistent with industry working groups such as Consumer Goods Forum. Now, since the launch of these questions, we received several queries regarding the definition, concept, and how to report the data related to the deforestation and conversion-free or DCF. Therefore, we are launching this webinar with the hope that we can improve companies' understanding on deforestation and conversion-free supply chains, so they can report data and be able to track their no deforestation and conversion commitment more accurately. Next, please. Now, before we get into the main discussion, I would like to ask you to fill up a poll, and this poll will help us to understand the level of understanding regarding this topic. So let's give a 30-second time to have everyone to fill up the poll. So the question is, how would you rate your understanding of the concept of deforestation and conversion-free supply chain? Is it very good, good, limited, or none? So okay. So maybe we give another 10 seconds. Okay, Alia, can you help to share the results? Okay, so based on the poll, most of the participants highlighted that they have limited understanding on the concept of deforestation and conversion-free supply chain. And 41% actually say they have a very good understanding on the concept, while 12% mentioned that they have a very good understanding on this topic. But of course, there are also 4% of the responder that say they don't have or they have none of understanding of the concept of the DCF supply chain. This is such a good insight, and hopefully our session today can help this almost like 88% or 52% or half of the responder to understand more about the topic. Now, without further ado, let's start our first session on using the accountability framework as a guide to achieve deforestation and conversion-free supply chains, concept, definition, and requirements. But before that, I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Ananda Putri Permatasari. She is currently the lead coordinator for the Accountability Framework Initiative in Southeast Asia. She facilitates the AFi Coalition in Southeast Asia to work with various supply chain actors in the agriculture and forestry sector to create continuous improvement in protecting the environment and respecting human rights by adopting the accountability framework. Mbak Putri, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marini. Hi, everyone. I see some familiar name and some not familiar. So I guess I haven't met with most of you before. I am Putri from Accountability Framework Initiative Southeast Asia Secretariat. And today I would be happy to share an idea on using the accountability framework as a guide to achieve deforestation and conversion-free supply chains in regards of the concept, definition, and also the requirements. Next. Okay, before going further, I would like to invite you to be more familiar with Accountability Framework Initiative, or AFI. So AFI works as a coalition that consists of environmental and human rights organizations with more than 20 organizations in the coalition. And the coalition works to make an ethical supply chain a new norm through the use of accountability framework by various supply chain actors. Some of the organizations that you see on the screen here, also part of the AFi Southeast Asia Coalition, that is focusing on the engagement with the supply chain actors in Indonesia and in Malaysia. Next. So AFi Coalition offered a global ethical supply chain framework. The name is Accountability Framework. And the framework consists of core principles, operational guidelines, and definitions that are applied globally in all regions where the production of forest and agricultural commodities poses the risk
yang untuk menghadapi resiko deforestation, conversion, dan juga pelanggaran hak asasi manusia, dan juga ada di semua komoditas pertanian, jadi bisa mempromosikan
commodity. It also applies to supply chain actors in all segments, starting from producers to retailer. Next. And then, do you know, by using the accountability framework, the supply chain actors can have a wide range of benefits. First, the framework integrates environmental protection and human rights norms at its latest best practices, and also fulfill market expectation at the same time based on consensus. so it can create bigger confidence for all of us to move forward. And the framework can also be a common approach for the whole organization, while it applies to agricultural and forestry commodities worldwide. And also, like I mentioned before, in all supply chain segments. It helps companies to have synergy in their sustainability across the entire business. And furthermore, the framework also provides details through the provision of clear definitions and guidance to achieve effective actions. And the framework has now aligned with more than 70 sustainability tools, resources, and initiatives. That is to accommodate goal setting, monitoring, or reporting. So it includes CDP. And this is to support various actions that go into the same direction, towards achieving ethical supply chain goals. And furthermore, the framework also offers the approach for addressing deforestation-free commitments, climate targets, and also biodiversity goals, all at the same time at once, because it works together with SBTI flag, SBTN, and also greenhouse gas protocol. Next slide. Yeah, the framework offers resources across 7 action areas that make it quite simple to get started wherever we are in the supply chain progress. So regardless where the company is on the supply chain journey, these actions and the corresponding framework core principles can help them identify practical areas for improvement. And the action areas are to set or strengthen supply chain goals, establish company management systems, manage supply chains, manage production, and also collaborate for landscape and sectoral sustainability, monitor, verify performance, and report progress, both for public and privately. So the webinar topics today are not going to focus to all of them, but rather with action areas on set goals, managing supply chains, monitoring, and reporting. Next slide, please. The first relevant area related to TCF measures is setting goals. The accountability framework helps companies at all stages to set ambitious and practical goals to protect forests and other natural ecosystems. By having the goals so that the company can have a strong foundation to achieve the ethical supply chains commitment effectively. A robust commitment to TCF has to state commitment to eliminate deforestation and also conversion from the company's production, sourcing, and financial investments. And the commitment must include key definitions as defined by the framework and state also a cutoff date. And it should concern the long protection of natural forests and other natural ecosystems, including conducting or also supporting restoration or compensation acts. And it should be followed, of course, by an action plan to make it real with a measurable target and a target date no later than 2025. Next slide. The framework defines deforestation as the loss of natural forests, including the loss caused by conversion to tree plantation. The definition pertains to no deforestation supply chain commitments, which generally focus on preventing the conversion of natural forest. Furthermore, severe degradation and legal deforestation are also considered as deforestation according to the definition in the framework. And the framework encourage supply chain actors to use gross definitions instead of gross deforestation instead of net deforestation, in terms of the defining deforestation. It is because gross deforestation is not including the deduction for reforestation or another offset. Next. And then the next action area regarding managing supply chain, companies should know the origins and compliance status of the material in the or the product. And for this, accountability framework helps companies improving their traceability systems. So primary processors and also the first intermediary can directly know the origin of the raw materials. But downstream intermediaries, manufacturers, and retailers might need to include suppliers to support effective traceability. So some possible acts are to trace back to the producers of origin or to suppliers that have control systems for ensuring traceability to the origin, or to use a certification program that already align with the framework, so it can provide effective traceability result. And another way is also to trace to a low-risk jurisdiction. And for further note, if none of this level is achieved by now, that's also fine, as long as it should be improved over time with a clear timeline and clear target. Next. The next relevant action area is monitor and verify progress. So this is for tracking environmental and human rights performance. All companies should conduct regular monitoring and followed with verification in their supply chains related to their commitments and also the timeline of the targets. And monitoring systems can help demonstrate companies that are meeting market, legal, or regulatory obligations, and also inform other actors with their internal decision-making and continuous improvement efforts. And monitoring can be done directly if the role of the companies in the supply chain is a producer or primary processor. Companies in the middle or even in downstream normally unable to collect the information directly. So if that is the case, monitoring a sourcing area is an alternative, and monitoring supplier management or control system is another alternative if they are too far in the downstream segment. Next. And then the last but not least action area is to report progress. Companies can use the accountability framework to streamline both public sustainability reporting and business-to-business reporting. Both of them are needed to meet stakeholders' expectations, especially for transparency and to support them with claiming about their performance. AFI has worked closely with leading reporting systems, including CDP, also with various standards or platforms to align requirements and indicators in accordance with the framework. So this can reduce the burden for the companies to report to different standards. And additionally, the framework guides companies on how to report credibly across 4 elements of progress. These are, the first is exposure and risk, and then implementation and management system. The third is traceability and control. And the last is compliance and outcomes on the ground. Next. Okay. Here is an example of a DCF volume disclosure indicator. What percentage of total volume of the commodity produced, purchased, sourced, or used by the company in the past year is demonstrated to be DCF? And then on the next slide, please. Next. Yeah, and then these are some examples of indicators for disclosing non-DCF volume. Does the company have a process for regular supplier engagement? Does the company have a mechanism to identify and to respond to non-compliance? What policies and activities are in place to improve supply chain traceability and control, and many more, as we can see on the screen together. But the important thing is that companies should report on the non-DCF volume, because they have to prove improvement in reducing the non-DCF volume from time to time. Okay, next. All right, that is all from my side. I hope you enjoyed it and find it helpful. And I will be happy if you have any questions. I will be happy to answer. Thank you, and over to Mbak Rini.
Thank you, Mbak Putri, for the presentation. The next presentation will be focused on how companies can report their deforestation and conversion-free data through CDP forests. My colleague, Niall Robb, will be hosting the session. Niall is currently working as a technical manager for Forest Questionnaire and Guidance in CDP. He led the development of the Forest Questionnaire and Guidance, and also responsible for responding to queries regarding the Forest Questionnaire. Without further ado, I'll hand over the session to Niall. Over to you, Niall.
Great. Thank you very much, Rini, for the introduction, and thank you, Putri, for your input as well. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Niall Robb. I'm the technical manager for the Forest Questionnaire at CDP, and I'll be kind of talking you through how to use CDP to report on your deforestation and conversion-free status. Next slide, please. So just to start off a little bit of what we're going to cover today, we'll first take a look at CDP's approach to DCF, the questions themselves, the rationale behind them, and some of the ambitions that may exist with them, some of the relevant scoring associated to, and resources that can help you when addressing this. Next slide, please. Great. So for this year, for the disclosing cycle of 2023, CDP developed a series of new questions and content designed to develop a deeper understanding of risk of deforestation and conversion that can come directly from or is also associated with a company's commodity volumes. This was initially first addressed through an expansion of the questions on commodity volumes in 2022, and now through a new question that also asks more granular data, more granular detail on commodity volumes. When considering the risk of deforestation and conversion that comes with a commodity volume, there are varying levels of risk associated with the volume depending on the levels of traceability and verification. If a commodity volume can be robustly verified as deforestation and conversion free, then this stands to reason that it carries a much lower risk of deforestation and conversion, as there is an assurance through the verification method that natural forest ecosystems are not being lost. Conversely, if a commodity volume does come from an unknown origin, then this carries the highest level of risk, as we don't know where this commodity originates from, and we don't know what the associated deforestation or conversion is occurring on site. Levels of traceability between these points can help to reduce the level of risk and provide an improved picture on how much deforestation or conversion may have occurred. So as Putri pointed out, this approach seeks to align with the AFI perspective on determining risk of deforestation or conversion through verification and through traceability, and whether really enough traceability for a commodity volume exists to be able to reduce the associated risk of deforestation and conversion and approach a level of DCF status. Next slide, please. So for a bit of a visual aid here, these diagrams show how this approach may work in a bit more of a visual format, and how the two relevant questions that CDP asks, F1.5a and F1.5b, actually work together. In these diagrams, the entire circle on both sides represents 100% of a commodity volume that is being disclosed by a company. So say all of your timber or all of your palm oil, regardless of the form. The green section on these represents how much of that total volume is verified as DCF. And the orange-brown section represents that which cannot be verified as DCF. Note there should be no other volumes here. Either a volume is verified as DCF or it's not. The right-hand diagram serves to demonstrate decreasing levels of associated risk with the volumes that come from traceability and DCF verification. You can see here that on the right diagram, wedge number 6 represents the highest level of risk. So that's to say volumes that come from an unknown origin. As we increase the levels of traceability to knowing the general sourcing area, but not one that has DCF verification, we can move into the next section round the wheel and so on. This continues until we can trace to farm level, but as you can see, that's where the orange section ends, and only through the verification of DCF status can we begin to move into the green sections, which carry the lowest level of risk. So this is the general principle of how our questions work and what they are asking. Next slide, please. So here we can look at how this approach is integrated into the CDP forest questionnaire. In order to take this approach and break down DCF and non-DCF volumes more granularly and understand what's going on, we first need to know how much of a company's total disclosed commodity volume is DCF by percentage. So let's say that a company can verify 75% of their timber volume as DCF. They would state that here. And as a result, we would know not only that 75% of their timber is DCF, but we would also know that 25 is non-DCF by deduction. So, but also, since companies have already stated their volumes by weight or mass in the preceding columns, we can calculate what total volume is in measurable units as DCF and non-DCF as well. Column 8 in this question allows companies to state the methods that they've used for verification as well. So note that this principle still does apply regardless of how many commodity forms a company may be disclosing for the same commodity. Because we're working with percentages of total volume, companies don't need to worry about how this translates when disclosing multiple different forms of the same commodity across different rows. The percentages allow us to look at it as an aggregate. Now that we know how a company's commodity volume can be broken down into DCF and non-DCF, the next question breaks this down a little bit further. Next slide, please. So 1.5b, this is a new question which asks, oh, if you can kind of go back a slide there, please. Oh, no, sorry, next slide. Thanks. Perfect. Okay. So this new question asks companies for a breakdown of their DCF volumes by verification method, and it also asks for a breakdown of non-DCF by traceability levels. The question seems quite large, but we'll walk you through it. It is quite straightforward. As a reminder, we define DCF as commodity sourcing or production that does not cause or contribute to deforestation or conversion of natural ecosystems. For each disclosed commodity, companies can select the DCF or select DCF or non-DCF and provide the percentage of their volumes that fall into each category. The appearance of columns will be determined by what percentage of a company's volume is verified as DCF in the previous question, so the columns in the previous question that was mentioned. You can see for each of the potential commodities listed on the first column on the left-hand side, there are rows for both DCF and non-DCF volumes. If you select in F1.5a, the previous question, that you have DCF and non-DCF volumes for timber, for example, you will be presented with both timber rows. For a DCF row, you will only have to provide information in the first 3 columns, which we can see from the column headers on this image here, only refer to DCF volumes. And the other columns will not appear for these rows, which they will appear as blank. For non-DCF volumes, the opposite applies. You will be asked to fill out the remaining columns, so that's columns 4 through 8 for the relevant DCF rows, for non-DCF rows. So just to clarify, on a commodity, for the DCF rows, you will see the first 3 columns. For the non-DCF rows, you will be presented with columns 4 through 8. So as a reminder, the numbers that you put here, this is quite important, the numbers that you would fill in this question are not the percentage of your total volume. They are the percentages of your DCF and non-DCF volumes that fall into these relevant categories. So for example, if half of your total timber across all the commodity forms that you're disclosing can be verified as DCF, then the first 3 columns are asking you to break that volume down. You're being asked to treat your DCF volumes as a distinct 100% and split it up across the 3 columns. You don't need to think about the total percentages of the percentage of your total volumes when filling out this question. Only that you're accounting for the verification methods of the DCF volumes and the traceability stages of the non-DCF volumes. The report, this may sound quite a lot, but the reporting guidance does clearly lay out what steps you should be taking to complete this question. And I would encourage anyone filling this out to take a good look at the guidance that's attached with it. We can now take a look at an example of how to fill out this question, which is also found in the guidance for you to refer to. Next slide, please. Great. So here we have an example of a company that is disclosing on 3 distinct commodities, with timber, palm oil, and soy. And we have deliberately constructed it so that there are different DCF volumes for each. In this example, we have a company that is reporting that, yes, they do have DCF and non-DCF volumes for timber, that the company only has DCF volumes for palm oil. So this is to say that for this company, 100% of their palm oil is DCF, and conversely, none of their soy volume is DCF. It's all non-DCF. So this kind of gives you an example of all the different kind of scenarios that you may find yourself in, as either having 100% DCF, 0% DCF, or a mix. We can look at how each of those is addressed. Next slide, please. So for this first one, we can see that the timber products, this is asking for your a breakdown of the timber products that are verified DCF. You can see across the first 3 columns, we're asking for the 3 different verification methods. So this is to say what percentage of your what percentage of your DCF volumes come from areas with no or negligible risk. What percentage comes from what percentage can be verified through a monitor system, and what percentage is physically certified. So you can see that this is broken down across these 3 columns, and the column on the far right hand side auto calculates this for you. So it adds up all of the numbers that you're putting across this column and lets you know that 100% of your DCF timber has been accounted for through the verification methods provided. Next slide, please. For this next row, as we've established in 1.5a, this company not only has the DCF volumes for timber, but also non-DCF volumes. So here we're breaking down the non-DCF volumes by the levels of traceability attached to them. This refers back to the circle diagram that we showed earlier on, showing that as we move through levels of traceability and increase it, we kind of decrease the associated level of risk. So here we have all the different levels of traceability for the non-DCF volumes, and as you can see, that adds up to 100 as well. It should be noted that you can see on this example, some of the rows appear as blank. That means that those cells are not presented to you because they're not relevant. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this one, as we mentioned earlier, for this particular company, 100% of their palm oil volume can be verified as DCF. So like in the previous example for timber, we can break this down across the verification methods, and we can see that that correctly totals up to 100% of their DCF volume. Next slide, please. But as we mentioned, they because they're disclosing on palm oil, there is the non-DCF rule also appears. Ideally, we would have had this prefer this not to appear at all, but this was a product of limitations on the systems on which we host our questions. So what this means is that because there is no DCF, so there is no non-DCF volume, this means that we can just ask the company to fill in zeros for this row because it's not relating to any volume. So having a row of zeros like this for a question where it is relevant is a perfectly acceptable answer to give. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. For this last example, this relates to soy where there is no none of the volume can be verified as DCF. So this means that 100% of it is non-DCF. Of course, because there is no DCF volume to disclose on, but the company is still generally disclosing on soy, we ask that you fill in a row of zeros here. And that auto calculates up to 0. Next slide, please. Great. And for this example, you would expect that we would maybe ask you, because 100% of the soy volume that this company is disclosing on is non-DCF, that we would ask for that to be broken down. Well, we actually don't ask for it to be broken down here, because if we were to do that, we're basically asking a traceability question for 100% of your soy volume, which we already asked. That's question F 6.2 and 6.2a. So in the case where a company has 100% of a commodity volume and none of it can be verified as DCF, we simply ask that you put zeros here and you provide this information in the traceability question instead, because otherwise it's simply asking you to do a duplication of effort, which we like to avoid. Next slide, please. Great. So as we can see here, this shows how the auto calculate column at the end functions. There's no need for you to put anything in here. This just totals up the numerical values that you are putting across the separate rows. To fill this in correctly, this question, the numbers in this row will either have to be 100 for the relevant columns or 0 for those columns that has been determined are not relevant for you to fill in. This is what we would expect to see from a typical question where an organization has sort of multiple different relationships with DCF across different commodities. Next slide, please. Great. So the rationale for this question is that developing a comprehensive risk profile for commodity volumes in terms of DCF status or traceability and verification, this enables companies and CDP data users to better understand the risk of deforestation and or conversion linked to the volumes produced or consumed by a company. What we would like to see with a question such as this, companies are able to account for the DCF status or traceability of all of the commodity volumes that they are disclosing on and are working towards eliminating deforestation and conversion of other ecosystems from their supply chain. Next slide, please. So just briefly to understand what the scoring implications of these questions are for 2023. So for F1.5a, where we ask how much of your total volume can be verified DCF, if you select yes, that you have volume that can be verified and you provide a number greater than 0, that is one way to approach this question. Or if you state that no, but you are planning to verify volumes as DCF in the next 2 years, then there's also a valid way to address this question, because it demonstrates you either understand your DCF volume at the present or you are driving ambition to change that. It's good practice. For question 1.5b, the one that we just looked at, as this is a new question for this year, we typically take a less mature scoring approach to introduce the concept. So what we ask here is that in 1.5b, the auto calculate column, the column at the end that we want to either add up to 100 or 0, is basically adding up to 100 where relevant and also to 0 where relevant. Simply, we are asking that you just fill in the question as best you can, and on an honest representation of how your DCF volumes are broken down by verification method and how your non-DCF volumes are broken down by traceability. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have a variety of resources that we can provide, well, that CDP does provide to help organizations in disclosing through these questions. We always encourage companies to refer to the reporting guidance. There's quite a lot of information there on how to fill out questions step by step in the best way. The scoring methodology also demonstrates what kind of criteria in terms of your answers we are looking for, and what we consider to be best practice. And additionally, for this year, CDP has produced a technical note called Implementing Commitments on Deforestation and Ecosystem Conversion that covers not just DCF, but also covers various other associated concepts such as traceability, verification, certification, the differences between them, and also how they all work together. So I encourage companies to take a look at that as well, please. And that move on to the next slide, please. That's all from my part of the presentation. So I'll briefly hand back to Rini. Thank you.
Thanks, Niall, for the presentation. Very detailed and quite technical as well. So hopefully, it can help companies that currently responding to CDP questionnaire to guide them to answer all the questions. So and the next session will be Q&A, but before that, I wanted to inform a little bit about our update. The deadline for companies responding to CDP to submit their response in order to be eligible for scoring will be on the 26th of July. The platform will be closed on 27th of September. So you still have time to respond to the question, and also to respond to the question F1.5A and 1.5B. Next, please. As you can see from the chat box, it's quite active. We have several questions received in our Q&A box, and also there are some questions that sent in the chat box, but please, I would like to ask all participants to put their question, to share their question in the Q&A box, so it's easier for the panelists to track your question and respond to your question. Okay, so let's start with one question. This question is for Niall. Niall, in F1.5B, how can a company ensure that volumes reported in columns 1 to 3 do not overlap while adding up to 100%?
Yes. So for this particular question, at the moment, we are just encouraging companies to disclose as best and honestly as they can when breaking down the verification methods for DCF. We do understand that there will be a sense of overlap with many of these, and that's something that we can take into consideration with future development of our questions. We encourage just companies just to try and break down their volumes by verification method as best they can. If, say, for example, a company has 50% of their DCF volume come from an area of no or negligible risk, but also that volume and that volume and more is also certified physically. You can put down physical certification over no or negligible risk. Currently there is no preference between which is better. So we just encourage companies to fill it in as best they can, and ensure that it adds up to 100%.
So a follow-up question. So will company be penalized for reporting percentage that add up to 0%?
If it is the case that there are conditions where a company must report 0% in some of the rows. So any of the rows where 0% must be reported rather, will not be penalized. So for example, if a company selects 100% DCF volume for timber, then the row for timber products that's asking about non-DCF should have 0 reported in it because there is no volume to report on. So that won't incur a penalty, just to clarify. As per the scoring criteria, if both DCF and non-DCF rows apply for a specific commodity, then the criterion kind of must be met on both rows to achieve the point.
Okay, great. So now I will move to another question for Ibu Putri. So the question is alignment with EUDR, specifically how the framework can be used for companies in adhering to the EUDR. Over to you, Mbak Putri, to answer the question.
Yeah. Thank you, Barini. So AFI has done the benchmarking exercise with the EUDR requirements, and the summary of the result is that two are highly aligned with each other, but sometimes there are a difference of language use. And if you want to have like comprehensive detail on the comparison, it is available in the operational guidelines in applying DCF supply chain. And for an example of the similarity, both are referring to FAO for defining forest. So it means that AFI and EUDR protect natural forests and not a forest. Like, I mean, natural forest is only part of the forest. And then both also acknowledge the conversion to tree plantation as deforestation. And also the other thing, AFI also defines the conversion from natural forest to tree plantation as a form as deforestation, same as EUDR, while EUDR defines the conversion of a primary forest or naturally regenerating forest into plantation as forest degradation. So you see, there is a language difference, but the purpose is the same. I hope that can answer your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Putri, for the response. And we'll get back to Niall again. There's another question, Niall, which is, I think this is from companies supporting their clients to respond to CDP forests. So the client has entered 100% for their DCF volume as certified, then 88 and 12% for non-DCF volume as country and sub-country. Auto-calculate shows 100% for both, but an error message come up saying volume must add up to 0% or 100%. Do you know how to fix this error? Very technical question. Over to you, Niall.
Yes. So the message basically will come up in all circumstances at the present time. And it will say that volumes must add up to 100% or 0%. This message is just a reminder that organizations need to make sure that they are, or companies rather, make sure that these add up to 100 or 0%. It will not stop you from proceeding with your disclosure. It's simply just a warning message that appears in all cases. Yeah, it stays there basically. So.
Yes, because I think there's also another question in chat box. It's quite a lot of question here. We have a Q&A. We also have chat. So again, I'll ask all participants to kindly put your question in the Q&A box so we can monitor it and respond to your question. Yes, because another question here, I think in the chat box is, oh, apparently it's gone now. Yeah, it's the same question about the pop-up when you putting the number in the column. Okay, so I'm going to move on to question for AFI. So this question is from Julie and asking, are there certification schemes that are aligned with AFI framework? Mbak Putri, maybe you can answer this question.
Yeah, thank you. Also, so far, we have identified quite a lot of certification schemes that are aligned with the framework. For example, RSPO and then FSC, also Protera, and there might be like more by now because we have been doing further exercise analyzing the alignment of AFI with certification schemes.
Thank you, Mbak.
Oh yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Mbak Rini. If I can add, if you want to see like more comprehensive list, please do not hesitate to contact us. And there are some lists as well in our guidelines.
Thank you, Mbak Putri. I'm conscious of time. We have 9 more minutes and we have tons of questions. So now I'm going to ask Niall on some question. In F1.1, which is asking companies where there's, where the origin of their commodities, should companies select the country where their recycled paper was produced as the country of origin? And the second question is, in 1.5a, how can companies report on their paper DCF volumes if they consider the country of manufacture of recycled paper as the country of origin? Go ahead, Niall.
Good question. So on the first question, so should companies select the country where the recycled paper was produced as the country of origin? From a CDP side, we say no. As per the guidance, the country where timber is grown, harvested, or reared is the country of origin. Companies may select the option for unknown origin in column 4 of that question, in addition to the countries or areas where they are certain that the commodity did originate from. So our approach to origins of recycled paper and recycled materials is laid out in our guidance as it is. On the second part to your question, how can companies report on their DCF? Report their paper volumes as DCF if they consider the country of manufacturing as a country of origin. Yeah, companies can't really consider the country of manufacture of recycled paper as the country of origin. Companies may select, I suppose, timber in column 1 of 1.5a and explain this is recycled in the please explain column for that question. If none of the methods used by a company can trace the commodity to at least an area with no or negligible risk of deforestation, then the commodity can't really be considered DCF. Companies can report on their recycled paper volumes where the country of origin of paper is unknown in 1.5b, which is the best options for doing that. But in short, for recycled materials where the origin of the country is not known, it can't really be considered DCF.
Thank you, Neil. All right, we have another question for Mbak Putri. Sorry. I was just checking. Mbak Putri, maybe just checking if you have more question. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's one more question. Can you give example how downstream suppliers can monitor and verify what their suppliers share with them?
Yeah, sure. Basically, what can be given to the buyer from the supplier is any documentations to prove it. It can be like risk assessments and supply chain mapping, and then the traceability database systems. And it could be also procedures for identifying or addressing non-compliance. If you ever heard about grievance system, that is also part of it. And of course, the whole monitoring, verification, and reporting systems that the data can be generated and given to the buyer, and some additional control measures, including certification that can be the proof as well. And of course, reporting on DCF volumes and status by disclosing the progress through reporting platform like CDP.
Thank you, Mbak Putri, for the response. I'm gonna get back to Neil again. I think there are also like some question here about a certification scheme, Neil. So can certification schemes such as FSC chain of custody be used to verify DCF commodity in F1.5A?
Yes, yeah, they can. Any third-party certification schemes that specify specifically a no deforestation or no conversion requirements found, I believe FSC chain of custody is one of those certification schemes, are acceptable to use in this question as well, especially because certification schemes, we would argue, are probably some of the most robust ways to verify non-DCF or verify DCF status rather, along with monitoring as well.
Okay, thank you. And another question, Neil. Well, a lot of question is coming from pulp and paper sector actually here. In F1.5B for paper, what is the required traceability point to base the reported data on in column 1, 2, and 8?
1, 2, and 8. Okay, so I guess as per we do, because it's related to traceability, we also have more guidance on traceability in our tech note, but also for 6.2a, which is our traditional traceability question. So as per the guidance in some of those places as well, a named paper mill for the paper and pulp, as industry as you're mentioning, a named paper mill is an acceptable point of origin for paper or paper packaging.
Great. Now I will move to Mbak Putri. We have one question, Mbak Putri, which is, do you have any examples of monitoring and verification system for DCF?
Yeah, for monitoring, we can use Global Forest Watch to monitor the land use change, and then also greenhouse gases protocol to measure emissions reduction from that land use change, or from the restoration effort. And there is also Trace. If you ever heard about it, it's from Global Canopy. It can map supply chain from country to country. And you can also, if you are in the palm oil sector, you can use a tool like palmoil.io to assess the risk. That is the example of for monitoring and for verification. It can be done by the company itself, as long as the person is different with the one who is doing the program. And it can be also done by a third party if you need more, to be more convincing to the public.
Thank you, Mbak Putri. I'm, super, like I'm just checking our time right now. Unfortunately, the time is up. We already in an hour after, throughout our event. Very happy to see so many questions coming to our Q&A box. We will collect this question and see if we can respond to it. But unfortunately, we will need to end our event for today. And thank you very much for, for Niall and also for Putri for, very, very clear presentation. And hopefully all this, all this information can help companies, particularly those responding to CDP questionnaire, to understand how to fill up the question in F1.5A and 1.5B. So before we end the session, I would like to ask your help to do some polling. So operator, can you please help to show the poll? So we have another poll just to measure, your understanding after we conduct this event. It will help us to measure the effectiveness of this event and also for our future activities. So if you kindly could kindly please fill up the poll. The question is still the same, which is following the webinar, how would you rate your understanding of the concept of deforestation and conversion-free supply chain? So let's give around 15 seconds for participant to fill up this this poll. And all right. So all right, I think we can end the poll right now. We're already 2 minutes over the time. So ladies and gentlemen, the time is up for our webinar today. And if you have company-specific questions, please email us at the address shows on your screen. Next, please. And we will get back to you. Thanks again for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Goodbye.